I never planned to work for the fastest man alive. My degree was in hospitality management with a focus on luxury properties, and after 5 years managing boutique hotels in Miami, I was simply looking for a new challenge. The job listing was vague: private estate manager for international sports figure, Kingston, Jamaica. But the salary was triple what I was making, with accommodations included, after 3 rounds of increasingly detailed interviews and an intimidating stack of non-disclosure agreements. The recruitment director finally revealed whose home I would be managing. "The position is at Mr. Usain Bolt's primary residence in Kingston," she said, watching my reaction carefully. "He values discretion, efficiency, and authenticity. This isn't a role for someone looking to associate with celebrity. It's for someone who can create a frictionless living environment for an athlete who, despite retirement, maintains an extraordinarily demanding schedule." My mind raced. Usain Bolt, 8-time Olympic gold medalist, the only sprinter to win Olympic 100 meters and 200 meters titles at 3 consecutive Olympics, the fastest human being ever recorded, the man whose 9.58-second 100-meter world record seemed to defy human limitations. 2 weeks later, I landed in Kingston with 2 suitcases and a notebook full of questions about estate management in Jamaica. What I didn't realize was that I was about to get an education in something far more profound than property operations. Over the next year, I would discover the hidden truths behind superhuman performance, secrets that had nothing to do with what the world assumed made Usain Bolt faster than any person in history. My first glimpse of the property took my breath away. A stunning contemporary mansion nestled in the verdant hills overlooking Kingston, with views stretching to the Caribbean. Security was tight but unobtrusive. The grounds immaculately maintained, but not ostentatious. Mrs. Bennett, the outgoing estate manager, who would train me for 2 weeks before retiring, met me at the gate. A stern Jamaican woman in her 60s with perfect posture and piercing eyes. She had managed the household since Bolt purchased the property. "Mr. Bolt isn't here today," she informed me as we walked toward the main house. "He's traveling for business, returning tomorrow evening. This gives us time to cover the basics without distraction." For the next several hours, Mrs. Bennett walked me through the complex operations of the household, security protocols, staff management, scheduling systems, maintenance requirements, dietary specifications, and the intricate calendar that governed everything. "Mr. Bolt appears relaxed to outsiders, but his life operates with precision," she explained. "Your job is to ensure that precision without creating tension. The environment must feel easy while functioning perfectly." As evening approached, Mrs. Bennett showed me to my accommodations, a comfortable guest house on the property with its own small garden. Before leaving me to settle in, she paused at the door. "One last thing," she said, her expression softening slightly. "People come here, expecting to understand what made him the fastest man alive. They look for secret training methods or genetic advantages." She smiled knowingly. "They're all looking in the wrong direction. Pay attention to what others miss, and you might actually learn something valuable." With that cryptic statement, she left me to unpack, unaware that her words had planted a seed of curiosity that would grow over the coming months. Little did I know that managing Usain Bolt's household would reveal insights about human performance that had nothing to do with fast twitch, muscle fibers, stride length, or training regimens. Truths that the cameras and commentators had completely missed. Chapter 2. First Impressions. My first meeting with Usain Bolt shattered every preconception I had formed from media coverage. I had expected the larger-than-life persona, the showman who struck his famous lightning bolt pose, the charismatic entertainer who danced after victories and playfully challenged sports commentators. What I encountered instead was something entirely different. It was 6:30 a.m., my 3rd day on the job. Mrs. Bennett had briefed me that Bolt typically began his mornings with a leisurely breakfast on the East Terrace, where I should join him to review the week's schedule. I arrived early to ensure everything was perfectly arranged: fresh fruit, Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee, his preferred protein smoothie, and the scheduling documents I'd carefully prepared. At precisely 6:30, Bolt emerged from the main house, wearing simple training clothes. At 6'5", his physical presence was immediately commanding, yet it was his demeanor that surprised me most. There was none of the exuberant energy I had seen on television. Instead, he moved with a quiet, almost meditative quality, deliberate, unhurried, and intensely present. "You must be Michael," he said, his voice softer than I expected. "Welcome to Kingston." "Thank you, Mr. Bolt. It's an honor to be here." "Just Usain is fine," he replied with a gentle smile, sitting down and gesturing for me to join him. "Mrs. Bennett speaks highly of you." As we reviewed the week's commitments, I was struck by how attentive he was, asking, clarifying questions, making thoughtful adjustments, completely focused on our conversation. Nothing like the playful, sometimes, distracted character portrayed in the media. When his phone buzzed, I expected him to check it immediately, as most high-profile individuals. Instead, he glanced at it, then turned it face down without responding. "Sorry about that," he said. "I protect my mornings. Nothing urgent happens before 8 a.m. in my world. This pattern, this stark contrast between public perception and private reality, would become increasingly apparent over the coming weeks." The world knew Usain Bolt as the extroverted showman, the natural athletic phenomenon who famously ate chicken nuggets before races and partied after victories. The man I observed daily was disciplined, reflective, and operated with amethodical intentionality that belied his carefree public image. His home reflected this duality. While certain spaces embraced his achievements, a tastefully designed room displaying his Olympic gold medals and world championship titles, most of Thersiden's, was surprisingly minimalist. His personal areas, particularly his bedroom and study, were almost monastic in their simplicity. "Too many things create too many thoughts," he explained when he noticed me taking inventory of his living quarters. "I like space to think." This philosophy extended to his daily routine. Despite being retired from professional competition, Bolt maintained a structured schedule that balanced business commitments, training, recovery, and personal time. What struck me most was not the content of this schedule, but the boundaries around it, the deliberate protection of specific times for specific purposes, regardless of external pressures. Most revealing was a conversation I overheard between Bolt and his longtime coach, Glenn Mills, who visited the residence weekly. I was arranging refreshments in the adjacent room when Mills asked him about a business opportunity that would require significant travel. "The money's exceptional, and it's only for 3 weeks," Mills noted. "It disrupts my recovery block," Bolt replied simply. "You're retired now," Mills pointed out. "Recovery doesn't have the same urgency." "It's not about physical recovery anymore," Bolt explained. "Those morning hours are when my mind resets. Without that space, everything else suffers. Business decisions, relationships, clarity. I've learned that lesson too many times." Mills nodded with understanding, and they moved on to other topics. But that brief exchange illuminated something fundamental about Bolt that few outside his inner circle ever glimpsed. Heist's extraordinary performances weren't built on natural talent alone, but on a sophisticated understanding of how to manage his entire system: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. As my first month managing the estate concluded, I began to realize that Mrs. Bennett's cryptic comment had been precisely accurate. Everyone focused on what made Bolt fast, analyzing his biomechanics, genetics, and training regimens. But there was something deeper operating beneath the surface, something invisible to cameras and commentators, something that created the foundation for everything else, and it had nothing to do with running at all. Chapter 3. The Rhythm By. My second month managing Bolt's household, I had settled into the operational routines. Their Thersiden's ran smoothly, staff knew their responsibilities, and I had earned enough trust to manage most situations without consultation. This efficiency granted me greater awareness of patterns that would have otherwise escaped notice. The most striking pattern was what the household staff simply called the rhythm. At first, I thought this was just a quaint Jamaican expression, but I soon realized it referred to something specific and intentional in how Bolt structured his life. Every aspect of his daily existence followed distinct rhythmical patterns, not just in terms of scheduling, but in energy expenditure, cognitive demands, and social engagement. These weren't haphazard preferences. They formed a sophisticated system that created the conditions for optimal functioning. The pattern became clear through consistent observation. Periods of intense focus and energy were always followed by periods of complete disengagement and recovery. This oscillation wasn't just about physical training. It applied to everything: business meetings, media obligations, even social gatherings. One particular day illustrated this perfectly. Bolt had a morning of intense business meetings regarding his various entrepreneurial ventures, a sports center development, endorsement negotiations, and a music production company. For 4 hours, I observed him fully engaged, analytical, decisive, and mentally sharp. Where others might take quick breaks between meetings to check phones or chat, Bolt would sit in complete stillness, eyes closed, for precisely 3 minutes before the next appointment. When the final meeting concluded at 1 p.m., his executive assistant attempted to add a quick call with an Australian sponsor. "Not now," Bolt said firmly. "It's transition time." What followed was a 90-minute period where he was completely unavailable. I later learned this time was spent in a specific recovery protocol: 20 minutes of gentle movement, 40 minutes. In a contrast, temperature treatment, alternating hot and cold therapy, and 30 minutes of what he called sound therapy, listening to particular audio frequencies through specialized headphones. When he emerged from this recovery period, he was visibly transformed, energy restored, focus reset, ready for the afternoon training session with the youth athletes he mentored. This rhythmic alternation between expenditure and recovery, focus and release, intensity and restoration occurred at multiple timescales within each day, across the week, and even seasonally throughout the year. Western culture has a linear view of energy, Bolt explained when I finally asked him about this pattern. More effort equals more results, but nature doesn't work that way. Everything pulses: heartbeats, ocean waves, planetary rotations, seasons. Human performance follows the same principle. He gestured toward the garden visible through the window where flowering plants were being tended by the groundskeeper. Plants don't grow faster if you pull on them. They need the right alternation of sunlight and darkness, water and dryness. When I understood that my body and mind operate the same way, everything changed. This philosophy apparently extended back to his competitive days, though it was never highlighted in media coverage. While commentators focused on his seemingly casual approach to racing, the smiling, dancing, and apparent lack of anxiety, they missed the sophisticated, rhythmical system operating beneath the surface. Everyone thought I was relaxed because I was confident, Bolt told me during a rare extended conversation about his competitive mindset. The truth was almost the opposite. I was confident because I was relaxed. The rhythm created the relaxation, which allowed the performance. His former coach confirmed this perspective when he visited for their regular strategic meeting. The media story was always that Usain was a natural talent who didn't take training seriously, Mills commented. Complete nonsense. What they saw as casualness was actually a precisely calibrated energy management system. While other sprinters were burning nervous energy before races, Usain was preserving his for the moments that mattered. This rhythmical approach extended beyond physical and mental energy to Bolt's social patterns as well. He was famous for his extroverted personality and love of celebration, yet what I observed was much more nuanced. His social engagements followed the same pulsing pattern: periods of vibrant, energetic connection with others, followed by stretches of solitude and introspection. Most revealing was how technology fit into this rhythmical system. Unlike most people horsebond immediately to notifications and remain constantly connected, Bolt treated digital communication as another energy system to be managed rhythmically. His phone was either fully engaged with his complete attention or completely put away. No in-between states of partial attention that characterize most modern lives. Rhythm requires boundaries, he explained when I commented on this habit. Most people fail to achieve rhythm because they allow constant interruption. The notifications, the alerts, the always-on mentality. It creates an arrhythmic state where the body and mind can never find their natural pulse. 3 months into my role, I began to understand that Bolt's legendary speed was not just the product of genetics, training, and competitive drive. It emerged from a life structured around rhythmical principles that created the optimal conditions for his system to express its capabilities. The lightning wasn't just in his legs, it was encoded in his lifestyle, a sophisticated understanding of energy management that few competitors ever mastered. Chapter 4. The Recovery. Protocol. 4 months into managing Bolt's household, I was granted access to what staff referred to as the Restoration Wing, a section of the residence devoted entirely to recovery and regeneration. What I discovered there transformed my understanding of athletic performance and human potential. The area contained a comprehensive recovery facility that rivaled professional sports teams' setups: contrast temperature pools, hyperbaric chamber, specialized massage areas, sleep optimization rooms, and technologies I didn't recognize. But it wasn't the equipment that proved most revealing. It was Bolt's philosophical approach to recovery itself. Most athletes think, "Training creates improvement," Bolt explained when he noticed my interest in the facility. That's only half the equation. Adaptation happens during recovery. The training creates the stimulus, recovery creates the actual improvement. This wasn't just a theoretical perspective. Bolt dedicated more time, resources, and attention to recovery than to active training. A complete inversion of how most people approach performance. While his active training sessions rarely exceeded 2 hours daily, his recovery protocols often totaled 4 to 5 hours, distributed throughout the day in precisely timed interventions. What struck me most was how scientific and personalized these protocols were. Bolt worked with a team that included sleep specialists, nutritionists, neurologists, and physiologists who had developed recovery methods specifically calibrated to his physiology and needs. Nothing was generic. Everything was precisely tailored. 1. Morning. I was arranging for equipment maintenance when Dr. Harrison, Bolt's longtime recovery specialist, arrived for their weekly assessment. I observed as he conducted a series of measurements, tracking variables like heart rate variability, sleep quality metrics, inflammatory markers, and cognitive processing speed. The margins between good and great are microscopically small, Dr. Harrison explained when he noticed my interest. Everyone focuses on training variables, but recovery capacity is actually the better predictor of who reaches their potential. He showed me a longitudinal chart tracking Bolt's recovery metrics throughout his career. The pattern was clear. His most extraordinary performances didn't correlate with increased training intensity, but with optimized recovery scores in the weeks preceding competition. The world record in Berlin. Perfect recovery scores for 18 consecutive days before the race. Dr. Harrison noted the triple-triple Olympic achievement in Rio, 30-day optimization of recovery metrics despite tremendous competitive pressure. What fascinated me most was how Bolt approached sleep, not as a passive necessity, but as an active performance enhancement tool. His primary bedroom was a technological marvel disguised as minimalist design, advanced temperature regulation systems, customized ambient sound profiles, lighting that automatically adjusted to support circadian rhythms, and bedding made from materials selected specifically for his body's thermal regulation needs. Sleep isn't just rest, Bolt explained when I inquired about these elements. It's the most powerful performance enhancer available, yet most people treat it as an afterthought. I approached sleep with the same seriousness I approached training, as something to optimize, not something to fit in when convenient. This perspective extended to what Bolt called micro-recoveries, short, strategic interventions throughout the day designed to reset his system before accumulated stress created diminishing returns. He witnessed this practice regularly. Between meetings or activities, he would often disappear for exactly 9 minutes, timed precisely. These brief intermissions followed a specific protocol: 2 minutes of specialized breathing techniques, 5 minutes in a particular restorative posture, and 2 final minutes of what he called sensory reset, a practice involving specific visual and auditory stimuli designed to recalibrate his nervous system. The fastest recovery is the one that happens before you need it, he often said. Perhaps most surprising was Bolt's application of recovery principles to cognitive and emotional domains, not just physical restoration. He maintained distinct practices for what he called mental recovery, clearing information, processing pathways, and emotional recovery, releasing accumulated tension and psychological stress. These weren't vague wellness concepts, but structured protocols informed by neuroscience and psychology. After particularly demanding cognitive tasks, complex business negotiations, or media training, he would engage in specific activities designed to restore mental capacity, nature immersion, specialized brain training exercises, or particular forms of movement that facilitated cognitive recovery. Most people understand physical fatigue, Bolt once commented after completing a mental recovery session. You feel it in your muscles, your breathing. But cognitive and emotional fatigue are less obvious until they're severe. I learned to recognize and address these early before they affected my physical performance. This integrated approach revealed something profound about Bolt's record-breaking achievements. While commentators attributed his success to natural talent, work ethic, and competitive drive, they missed entirely the sophisticated recovery infrastructure that made everything else possible. The world saw the lightning-fast race. They never saw the meticulously designed recovery system that created the conditions for that lightning to strike. As I continued managing the household and observing these practices, I began to understand Mrs. Bennett's cryptic comment from my first day. Everyone focused on what made Bolt fast, his stride length, his power output, his start technique. But these were merely expressions of a system operating in an optimal state. The true foundation of his extraordinary capability wasn't training methodology or genetic advantage. It was his unprecedented commitment to unsophistication around recovery. The fastest man in the world had mastered the art and science of slowing down. Chapter 5. The Mental Game 5. Months into my position, an unexpected situation provided unprecedented insight into the mental dimensions of Bolt's approach. A documentary crew had arranged to film segments of the residence for a retrospective. On his career, I was tasked with coordinating logistics while ensuring minimal disruption to Bolt's routines. During setup, the production team requested to film in Bolt's personal study, a room I had only entered briefly for cleaning arrangements. Bolt agreed, but asked me to supervise the process personally to ensure his materials remained undisturbed. What I found in that study transformed my understanding of his success. While I had expected trophies and memorabilia, the space was instead organized like a cognitive laboratory. One wall featured a massive whiteboard covered with what appeared to be a visual mapping system, connecting psychological concepts, performance principles, and philosophical ideas in an intricate framework. Bookshelves held volumes on subjects far removed from athletics, neuroscience, Eastern philosophy, systems thinking, quantum physics, and ancient Jamaican spiritual traditions. Most revealing was his desk, which held 3 journals with meticulous handwritten entries dating back years, psychological observations, mental performance notes, and detailed tracking of what he called inner metrics. While the crew set up lighting, I couldn't help but notice these journals were more comprehensive than any training log. Where most athletes might track sets and reps, Bolt had been documenting thought patterns, visualization techniques, and mental states with scientific precision. When the crew departed for their lunch break, Bolt entered to check on the progress. Noticing my interest in the whiteboard, he surprised me with an unexpected openness. Most people think the mental game is about motivation or confidence, he said, approaching the complex diagram. That's like saying a computer is about the power button. The real work happens much deeper in the operating system. He pointed to a central node in the visual framework labeled perception filtering. The world sees what I allow into my consciousness, he explained. That selection process, what I give attention to, what meaning I assign, what narratives I accept or reject, that's the foundation of everything else. This wasn't abstract philosophy, it was practical methodology. The journals revealed a systematic approach to mental conditioning that paralleled his physical training in its precision and progressive development. The documentary crew's interview that afternoon further illuminated this dimension. When asked about his famous pre-race demeanor, the smiling, dancing, and apparent nonchalance that contrasted with competitors' intensity, Bolt's answer revealed sophisticated psychological awareness. Those weren't just personality expressions, he explained. They were tactical choices about mental state management. The dancing calibrated my nervous system to optimal arousal levels. The smiling triggered specific neurochemical responses that enhanced cognitive flexibility. The casual demeanor was a conscious pattern interruption of the anxiety cycle. The interviewer seemed taken aback by this analytical response, clearly expecting a simpler answer about natural confidence or psychological warfare against competitors. But Bolt continued, describing a mental approach that had been largely invisible to outside observers. Everyone talks about my physical gifts, he said, but those gifts were present in dozens of athletes. The difference was that I understood competition is primarily psychological. While others trained their bodies, I was equally focused on training my perception, my mental models, and my awareness. After the crew departed, I found myself helping Bolt reorganize his study. He noticed my continued interest in his mental framework and shared something that had never been mentioned in media narratives about his success. For 2 years before my first world record, he revealed, I worked with a cognitive specialist to develop what we called perceptual filters, specific ways of processing sensory information during both training and competition. He explained that these techniques allowed him to selectively focus attention on performance-enhancing stimuli while filtering out performance-diminishing inputs. This wasn't just concentration, it was a sophisticated cognitive skill set that altered how his brain processed reality during key moments. In the 100 meters, there's no time for conscious thought. The race happens too fast. What matters is what your system automatically perceives and how it interprets that perception. That's what I trained, the automatic processing that happens before thought. This approach extended beyond competition to Bolt's entire relationship with his career and public. Persona. While most elite athletes were consumed by their athletic identity, Bolt had intentionally developed what he called identity compartmentalization, the ability to fully engage his athletic self when appropriate, while completely detaching from it in other contexts. The public thought I wasn't serious because I could laugh and relax before races, he explained. But that ability to step in and out of competitive identity at will was actually one of my greatest psychological advantages. Most athletes are A. trapped in their athletic identity, constantly creating tremendous psychological strain. In the weeks following the documentary shoot, I paid closer attention to how these mental principles manifested in Bolt's daily life. I noticed structured practices that had previously seemed like personal quirks or cultural habits. Specific visualization sessions each morning, metacognitive exercises integrated throughout his day, regular engagement with philosophical texts, and consistent reflection practices. Most striking was a ritual I observed before important business meetings or public appearances. Bolt would spend exactly 4 minutes reviewing what he called his identity anchors, physical objects that represented different aspects of his self-concept beyond athletics. These included his grandmother's Bible, a rock from his childhood home in Trelawney Parish, and a small wooden carving his father had made. When I finally asked about this practice, his explanation was illuminating. Success creates a dangerous trap. You begin to believe the narrow story others tell about you. These anchors remind me that I'm not just a sprinter or a celebrity or a businessman. Those are roles I play, not who I am. 6 months into managing his household, I realized that while the world had marveled at Bolt's physical speed, his greatest mastery was actually in the psychological domain, a sophisticated mental operating system that created the conditions for his physical gifts to find their fullest expression. The lightning wasn't just in his legs, it was in his mind. Chapter 6. The Cultural Foundation. By my 7th month working at the estate, I had gained enough trust to accompany Bolt on occasional trips beyond the residence. One such journey provided unexpected insight into perhaps the most overlooked dimension of his success. Bolt had arranged to visit his hometown in Trelawney Parish, a small community far removed from Kingston's cosmopolitanism and even further from the global cities where he had achieved fame. What began as a casual visit to family evolved into a profound revelation about the cultural foundations underlying his achievements. We arrived with minimal entourage at his childhood community, where Bolt was immediately transformed from global icon to simply Usain, or Lightning, as locals called him. What struck me immediately was how their interactions contained none of the deference or awe that typically surrounded him. Family members teased him, childhood friends challenged him to impromptu contests, and elders gave unsolicited advice with complete candor. As the day progressed, Bolt's behavior shifted subtly, his Kingston polish giving way to broader gestures, more pronounced patois, and a different physical cadence. This wasn't code switching for effect. It was a natural return to his cultural foundations. The most revealing moment came during an evening gathering at his aunt's home, where approximately 30 community members assembled for dinner. What began as a casual meal evolved into something more significant as elders began sharing stories, not about Bolt's athletic achievements, but about Jamaican cultural traditions and historical figures who had demonstrated resilience through adversity. One elder, whom everyone called Uncle Marcus, captured the group's attention with stories about Jamaica's maroon communities, descendants of escaped slaves who had established free settlements in the mountains and successfully resisted recapture for generations. "We come from people who could not be conquered," Uncle Marcus said, his voice carrying moral authority. Not because they were the strongest, but because they understood how to use their environment, their community, and their minds to overcome those with more resources. Bolt listened with the same focused attention he brought to his business briefings, occasionally nodding in recognition of familiar lessons. This wasn't merely entertainment. It was the transmission of cultural knowledge that clearly held deep significance for him. Later, as smaller conversations formed, I overheard Bolt speaking with a cousin about his early development as an athlete. Their exchange revealed how deeply Jamaican cultural values had shaped his approach to performance. "Remember when Grandma used to say, 'Fire na light from nothing'?" his cousin asked. "Every day," Bolt laughed. "And what comes easy won't last, what lasts won't come easy." These weren't just quaint sayings. They were expressions of cultural wisdom that had been integrated into Bolt's performance philosophy. The conversation continued, touching on specific Jamaican concepts that had no direct English equivalents, ideas about energy management, community responsibility, and relationship with natural rhythms that clearly informed how Bolt approached his craft. On the drive back to Kingston the next day, Bolt was unusually reflective. "People always asked what made Jamaican sprinters so dominant," he said, breaking a comfortable silence. "They looked for genetic advantages or training secrets, but they missed the most important factor, how our culture shapes our relationship with performance." He explained that specific elements of Jamaican cultural perspective had provided foundational advantages that no training program could replicate. "We have a concept called timing that's not just about clock time. It's about aligning action with the right moment, understanding natural rhythms. There's talawa, the strength that comes not from size but from resilience and adaptability. And airi, a state of being at peace while remaining completely present and aware." These weren't abstract concepts for Bolt. They were practical performance principles that had been culturally transmitted since childhood, creating a foundation for the technical training that came later. In the following weeks, I began noticing how these cultural elements manifested in Bolt's daily practices. His approach to training wasn't just scientifically informed, it was culturally coherent, integrating traditional Jamaican perspectives with contemporary performance science. Most revealing was a conversation I overheard between Bolt and a young Jamaican athlete he was mentoring. The young sprinter was describing his new training program with evident pride in its scientific sophistication. "That's good," Bolt acknowledged, "but what's your grounding practice?" The young man looked confused. "Your connection back to source," Bolt clarified. "The practice that keeps you rooted in who you are and where you come from." When the athlete admitted he had none, Bolt's response was illuminating. "That's like building a house from the second floor. All that scientific training stacks on top of cultural foundation. Without roots, you'll blow over at the first strong wind." This dimension of Bolt's success The deep cultural grounding beneath the visible achievements had been almost entirely missed by the media narratives surrounding his career. Commentators focused on biomechanics, genetics, and training methods, while overlooking the cultural operating system that gave those elements context and meaning. In the months that followed, I observed how this cultural foundation expressed itself in specific practices. Regular visits from community elders who were treated with profound respect, regardless of their social status. Integration of traditional Jamaican perspectives on health, and recovery alongside cutting-edge medical approaches, maintenance of community relationships that predated his fame and offered authentic connection beyond his athletic identity. Most significant was how this cultural grounding provided psychological stability amid global celebrity. While many international sports stars became untethered from their origins, creating identity crises when their athletic careers ended, Bolt remained fundamentally anchored in a cultural context that defined success in terms far broader than Olympic medals or world records. In Jamaican tradition, he explained during a rare extended conversation about his philosophy, your achievements aren't individual, they flow from and return to community. That perspective changes everything about how you experience success and failure. 8 months into my role, I understood that what made Bolt run like lightning wasn't just physical capacity or mental toughness. It was this invisible cultural foundation that provided context, meaning, and stability for everything else. The world saw the spectacular individual performer, they never saw the cultural soil from which that performance had grown. Chapter 7. The Invisible Discipline. 9 months into managing Bolt's household, a pattern had emerged that contradicted everything the public narrative suggested about his character and approach. While media portrayals had often emphasized his natural talent and seemingly casual attitude toward training, what I witnessed daily was extraordinary discipline, albeit of a kind rarely recognized or celebrated in conventional success stories. This wasn't the grim, suffer-at-all-costs discipline often glorified in sports mythology. It was something more subtle, more sustainable, and ultimately more effective, what Bolt himself called invisible discipline. The concept revealed itself fully during an unexpected conversation. I had been managing arrangements for a business conference where Bolt was keynote speaker, reviewing his talking points about entrepreneurship and performance. One section mentioned his approach to discipline, which caught my attention. Most people misunderstand discipline, he explained when I asked about it. They think it's about forcing yourself to do difficult things through sheer willpower. That model fails because willpower always depletes eventually. He described instead a systematic approach to removing friction from positive behaviors while adding friction to negative ones, creating an environment where optimal actions became the path of least resistance. True discipline is invisible, he continued. It's not about daily battles against yourself, it's about designing systems where the right choices happen naturally. This philosophy manifested throughout his household. The refrigerator contained only foods that supported his performance goals, arranged so the most beneficial options were most accessible. His phone was programmed to make social media virtually inaccessible during focus hours, while educational content and recovery tools were always one tap away. His clothing was organized to eliminate decision fatigue, with appropriate options for each day's activities pre-selected. These weren't random conveniences. They formed a comprehensive environmental design that made optimal choices effortless while making suboptimal choices require deliberate effort. Everyone praised my natural talent, Bolt reflected, but few noticed my unnatural environment. I engineered everything around me to make excellence inevitable rather than struggling to choose it each day. This systematic approach extended beyond his physical surroundings to his social environment. Bolt maintained what he called a discipline ecosystem, relationships specifically cultivated to enforce optimal behaviors and perspectives. This wasn't about surrounding himself with yes-men. Often, these relationships provided challenge and accountability rather than comfort. I witnessed this dynamic during visits from his childhood coach, who still addressed him as boy, regardless of his global stature, or his grandmother, whose expectations for his character remained unchanged by his fame, Who you spend time with determines what behaviors feel normal, Bolt explained. I deliberately maintained relationships with people who treated excellence as the baseline expectation rather than something exceptional. Perhaps most revealing was how this invisible discipline manifested in Bolt's relationship with pleasure and enjoyment. Unlike the stereotypical image of discipline as self-denial, his approach incorporated pleasure as a strategic element rather than an opponent to be overcome. The traditional model places discipline and enjoyment in opposition, he noted during a conversation about his training philosophy. That creates an unsustainable psychological conflict. I integrated enjoyment into the discipline path, making it reinforcing rather than contradictory. This perspective explained what many had misinterpreted as a lack of seriousness. Bolt's famous pre-race dancing, his playful media persona, his celebration of victories, these weren't departures from discipline, but expressions of a more sophisticated understanding of sustainable performance psychology. The highest discipline isn't forcing yourself to do what you hate, he explained. It's engineering yourself to love what serves your development. This philosophy had practical applications throughout his daily life. Rather than battling sustained motivation for recovery practices, he had systematically paired these activities with experiences he genuinely enjoyed, favorite music, compelling audiobooks, or conversations with close friends, until the recovery itself became intrinsically rewarding. The most striking example of this invisible discipline was Bolt's relationship with his training data. While he projected a carefree public image during his competitive career, privately he maintained meticulous records of every performance variable, not just times and distances, but subjective ratings of technique quality, emotional state, energy, levels, and dozens of other factors. I discovered this system while helping organize his home office. Bolt maintained a comprehensive digital dashboard that aggregated this data, revealing patterns and correlations invisible to conventional analysis. This wasn't just retrospective record-keeping, it was a sophisticated feedback system that guided daily decisions about training approach, recovery needs, and competition strategy. The world thought I succeeded despite my laid-back attitude, Bolt commented when he noticed my interest in this system. The truth is, I succeeded because of my systematic approach. Their lax exterior was possible precisely because the underlying systems were so rigorous. This invisible discipline explained what had always puzzled commentators about Bolt's career, how someone who seemed so casual in his approach could consistently deliver historic performances when they mattered most. What looked like natural ease was actually the product of extraordinarily sophisticated systems operating beneath the surface. 10 months into my role, I understood that what made Bolt different wasn't genetic advantage or training secrets. It was this invisible discipline, this comprehensive environmental and psychological engineering that made optimal behaviors the default rather than the exception. The lightning wasn't just in his legs, it was in the invisible systems that supported them. Chapter 8. The Stillness. My year managing Bolt's household approached its final months. I witnessed a dimension of his approach that contradicted everything typically associated with elite sprinting. While speed was his public signature, his private practice revealed an extraordinary relationship with its opposite, stillness. This revelation came gradually through observing a daily ritual so subtle I had initially missed its significance. Each morning and evening, Bolt would spend precisely 18 minutes in absolute stillness, not meditating in the traditional sense with specific techniques or focused attention, but in a state of complete non-doing that appeared to reset his entire system. When I finally inquired about this practice, his explanation challenged conventional performance wisdom. Everyone focuses on what you do to become excellent, he said, but what you don't do is equally important. These stillness periods are the empty space that gives meaning to everything else, like the silence between notes in music. This wasn't mere philosophical perspective, it was practical methodology. Bolt approached stillness as systematically as he approached movement with specific protocols for transitioning into and out of these states and precise measurements of their effects on subsequent performance. His team had even quantified the impacts, demonstrating measurable improvements in nervous system regulation, cognitive processing, and movement efficiency following these stillness intervals. What seemed like doing nothing was actually a sophisticated intervention that enhanced everything that followed. Most athletes train themselves to do something constantly, Bolt explained. I trained myself to do nothing exceptionally well. That capacity became my hidden advantage. This principle extended beyond formal stillness practices to Bolt's entire relationship with effort and non-effort. While most elite performers operated in a constant state of striving, Bolt had mastered the art of oscillation, knowing precisely when to apply effort and when to release it completely. I witnessed this during a training session with young sprinters he was mentoring. While other coaches emphasized constant intensity and pushing through barriers, Bolt's guidance took a different approach. Running fast isn't about trying harder, he told a teenager who was visibly straining. It's about releasing the unnecessary. Find what you're holding and let it go. This philosophy directly contradicted conventional athletic wisdom about maximum effort and pushing limits. For Bolt, peak performance wasn't about straining to achieve, but about removing the internal obstacles that prevented natural expression of capability. Most people associate speed with effort, grinding, pushing, forcing, he explained later. But the highest expressions of speed come from surrender, not struggle. The hardest thing to learn is how to get out of your own way. This perspective had informed his competitive approach in ways never captured by sports analysts. While commentators attributed his mid-race smiling to showmanship or confidence, it was actually a technical tool, a physical manifestation of the release principle that prevented the performance-limiting tension most sprinters experienced in major competitions. Tension is the enemy of speed, Bolt noted. The smile wasn't for cameras, it was a physiological trigger to release facial tension, which prevented the cascade of tension that typically moves downward through the body under pressure. Most revealing was how this relationship with stillness and release had shaped Bolt's legendary starts, paradoxically his technical weakness during his career. While competitors approached the blocks with increasing tension and anticipation, Bolt had developed a pre-start ritual of complete internal stillness, a momentary reset that allowed his subsequent movement to merge without the interference of anticipatory tension. The critical skill isn't generating power, he explained. It's removing resistance to the power that's already there. This philosophy extended beyond physical performance to Bolt's entire approach to achievement and ambition. Unlike the striving ambition that characterized many elite performers, his relationship with goals emerged from a different source, what he called directed allowing rather than forceful pursuing. I witnessed this distinction during a business strategy meeting where his team was planning a new venture. While others advocated aggressive timelines and intensive effort, Bolt offered a different perspective. We don't need to force this, he said calmly. We need to create the conditions where it can unfold naturally, address the obstacles, align the incentives, then allow it to develop at its organic pace. This wasn't passive or lacking ambition. It was a sophisticated understanding of how complex outcomes actually emerge, not through forced effort alone, but through creating the conditions where desired results can manifest with minimal resistance. As my final months at the estate progressed, I began recognizing how this principle of stillness and release appeared throughout Bolt's approach to life and performance. His famous pre-race relaxation, his ability to sleep soundly before major competitions, his calm amidst competitive pressure, these weren't personality quirks, but expressions of a deliberately cultivated capacity for stillness that few competitors had developed. Most significantly, this relationship with stillness had allowed Bolt to navigate the psychological challenges of global fame with unusual equilibrium. While many athletes became defined and ultimately trapped by their public identities, Bolt's practice of regular stillness created space between his essential self and the roles he played, allowing him to engage fully with his public persona without becoming consumed by it. Stillness creates perspective, he explained during a rare extended conversation about his philosophy. When you can genuinely do nothing, you're no longer desperate to be something. That freedom changes how you experience everything: training, competition, fame, even failure. 11 months into managing his household, I understood that what made Bolt run like lightning wasn't just physical capacity or technical excellence, it was this counterintuitive mastery of stillness and release that created the conditions for his extraordinary speed to express itself without interference. The world celebrated his velocity, they never noticed his profound relationship with its opposite. Chapter 9. The Truth About Speed A's. My year at Bolt's estate neared its conclusion. An unexpected opportunity arose to witness him in an entirely different context, teaching sprinting techniques to elite youth athletes at Apravet Camp held on his property. What I observed during those 3 days completed my understanding of what had truly made him the fastest human in history. The revelation came not through technical instruction about stride length or arm movement, but through a philosophical framework. He presented on the first morning a perspective on speed that contradicted everything conventionally taught in track and field. Everyone thinks speed is about moving faster, he began, addressing 20 talented teenagers seated before him. But real speed isn't about movement at all. It's about removing interference with your natural state. He explained a concept that had never appeared in media coverage of his career, that the human body is designed for extraordinary velocity, but this capacity becomes progressively inhibited by accumulated tension, compensatory movement patterns, and inefficient neural programming. Your body knows how to run incredibly fast, he told them. My job isn't to teach you speed, it's to help you identify and remove what's preventing your natural speed from expressing itself. This wasn't motivational rhetoric, it was practical methodology. Over 3 days, I watched as Bolt guided these young athletes through a progressive system focused not on pushing harder, but on identifying and releasing specific tensions, restoring natural movement patterns, and reprogramming neural pathways that had become inefficient. Most revealing was his approach to what he called speed meditation, a practice where athletes would sprint at only 50% of maximum effort while focusing complete attention on their internal experience of the movement. This wasn't about performance, it was about developing awareness of subtle inefficiencies that would otherwise remain undetected. Most coaches focus on what you should do, he explained. I'm more interested in helping you discover what you're already doing that you don't need to do, the unnecessary tensions and efforts that slow you down. This inverted approach, subtracting rather than adding, contradicted conventional training wisdom that emphasized additional effort, increased power output, and technical complexity. For Bolt, ultimate speed emerged not from accumulating advantages, but from eliminating disadvantages. The results were remarkable. By the camp's final day, several athletes had achieved personal bests not through increased effort, but through its opposite, a more refined efficiency that allowed their natural capabilities fuller expression. During a break in the instruction, Bolt elaborated on this philosophy to the coaches present. We've been thinking about athletic development backward. We talk about building speed, as though it's something to construct. But real speed is already there. It's your natural birthright. The development process is more about removing obstacles than adding components. This perspective illuminated what had always been mysterious about Bolt's own performances. While analysts had attributed his dominance to physical advantages like height, stride length, orifice twitch, muscle percentage, these factors alone couldn't explain the margin of his superiority. What set him apart wasn't physical capacity, but the extraordinary efficiency with which that capacity expressed itself. The absence of the interference patterns that limited other sprinters. Later that evening, after the participants had departed, I found Bolt reviewing footage of the day's sessions in his study. Noticing my presence, he shared an insight that crystallized everything I'd observed throughout the year. The greatest misconception about human performance, he said, gesturing toward the freeze-framed image of a young sprinter, is that it's primarily about what you do. At the highest levels, it's much more about what you undo, releasing the handbrakes that most people never realize they're carrying. He showed me comparative footage, his own Olympic performances alongside other world-class sprinters. What distinguished? His movement wasn't additional power or effort, but its opposite, an extraordinary absence of unnecessary tension and wasted energy. Where other elite sprinters displayed subtle indicators of effort, Bolt's movement had a quality of effortless alignment with natural principles. People called it talent, he reflected, but that's too simplistic. What they were seeing wasn't some special capacity I had that others lacked. It was the absence of interference patterns that everyone else carried. This philosophy explained why conventional analyses of Bolt's technique had never fully captured the secret of his speed. Biomechanical studies focused on what was present and measurable: stride length, ground contact time, power output, while missing what was absent: the internal resistances, compensatory patterns, and efficiency leaks that limited other sprinters. In our final weeks working together, this understanding expanded beyond athletics to Bolt's entire philosophy of achievement. Whether in business ventures, creative projects, or personal development, his approach consistently emphasized removing obstacles, rather than forcing outcomes, creating conditions where natural capacity could express itself without interference. "The world celebrates people who make things happen through force of will," he observed during our last extended conversation. I found it more effective to focus on allowing what's natural to emerge by removing what blocks it. It's a subtle difference that changes everything. As my year at the estate concluded, I understood that what made Bolt the fastest human in history wasn't what he did differently. It was what he didn't do. His extraordinary achievement wasn't adding something special to human capacity, but removing the limitations that prevent that capacity from expressing itself fully. The lightning wasn't something he created, it was something he allowed by removing everything that stood in its way. Chapter 10. The Legacy On. My final day managing Bolt's household, an unexpected situation provided the perfect culmination to my year of observation. A documentary crew had arrived to film segments for a retrospective on his career, focusing primarily on his physical achievements and technical approach. During a filming break, the director asked Bolt a question that inadvertently revealed the truth I had discovered over the previous 12 months. "After all these years of analysis," the director began, "what do you think was the secret physical advantage that made you faster than everyone else?" Bolt was quiet for a moment, smiling slightly as he considered his response. Then he said, "Something that perfectly encapsulated what I had witnessed throughout my time at the estate." "That's the wrong question," he replied gently. "It assumes speed is physical. At the highest levels, it's not. It's philosophical." The director looked confused, clearly expecting an answer about stride length, muscle fiber composition, or biomechanical efficiency. "The advantage wasn't in my body," Bolt continued. "It was in my understanding of what speed actually is. While others tried to create speed through effort, I focused on removing what prevented my natural speed from expressing itself. The secret wasn't what I had, it was what I systematically eliminated." This perspective, fundamentally challenging conventional wisdom about human performance, had been the thread connecting everything I had observed throughout the year. The rhythmic lifestyle that eliminated energy waste, the sophisticated recovery, systems that removed performance limitations, the mental frameworks that cleared psychological interference, the cultural foundations that provided meaning and context, the invisible discipline that made optimal choices effortless, and the profound relationship with stillness that allowed natural capacity to emerge without resistance. Later that evening, as I completed my final responsibilities and prepared for departure, Bolt invited me to join him for a conversation on the terrace overlooking Kingston. As the city lights emerged against the darkening sky, he reflected on what he hoped would be his true legacy. "The records will eventually be broken," he said. "That's the nature of sports. But I hope something more valuable survives, a different way of thinking about human potential." He explained that his greatest contribution wasn't demonstrating how fast a human could run, but rather challenging fundamental assumptions about how exceptional performance emerges, not through heroic struggle against limitations, but through the systematic removal of unnecessary obstacles to our natural capacities. "Most achievement philosophies are additive," he continued. "They focus on what to acquire, develop, or create. But the highest levels of performance come through subtraction, identifying and removing what blocks the extraordinary capabilities already present in human design." This perspective extended beyond athletics to broader implications for human development. Bolt described his current work with educational initiatives and youth programs, attempting to transmit not just techniques for speed, but a comprehensive philosophy for accessing natural capabilities across all domains of life. The conventional approach treats excellence as something external to acquire through effort, he explained. I'm interested in helping people recognize it as something internal to access through removal of interference. As our conversation concluded and we prepared to say goodbye, Bolt offered a final insight that encapsulated everything I had learned during my year at the estate. The world saw me as someone who could run extraordinarily fast, he said. But that capability exists within human design already. My contribution wasn't running at that speed. It was developing a systematic approach to removing the obstacles that prevent that natural capacity from expressing itself. He smiled, adding, "The lightning was always there. I just cleared the way for it to strike." The next morning, as I drove away from the property for the final time, I reflected on how completely my understanding had been transformed. I had arrived, expecting to discover the secret physical techniques or training methods that made Bolt faster than any human in history. What I found instead was a comprehensive philosophy that inverted conventional wisdom about human performance, focusing not on what to do, but on what to undo. Not on effort, but on efficiency. Not on acquisition, but on removal. The true legacy of Usain Bolt wasn't just in record books or Olympic medals. It was in this fundamental reconceptualization of human potential, the recognition that our most extraordinary capabilities might not require heroic striving to develop, but rather the systematic elimination of the internal and external interferences that prevent them from naturally expressing themselves. The world celebrated him for running like lightning, but his real achievement was understanding that such lightning isn't something we need to create through effort. It's something already present in human design, waiting to be liberated through the removal of the obstacles we rarely recognize we're carrying.